What is up, guys? Randomodium here. This is your Week 9 Fantasy LCS analysis and breakdown video for the 2017 Summer Split. In this video, we're going to break down all of the matchups for both NA and EU LCS, and I will be discussing the results from previous weeks. So if you haven't watched those matches, you don't want them spoiled, this is your spoiler warning. And this is it. This is the final week for Fantasy LCS. The EU does have a Week 10, but it's not counted towards Fantasy LCS. So yeah, this is the last Fantasy LCS video for this season, and it's been a pretty amazing season. We actually just went over 1,000 subscribers today, and that was my goal by the end of the season to hit 1,000 subscribers. So we exceeded that goal, and yeah, fantasy leagues have been going really great. I am in 11 fantasy leagues with you guys, the subscribers, in pretty much all of them. And out of my 11 fantasy leagues, in 2 of them, I am guaranteed first place. And then another 6, it is coming down to the final week to determine whether or not I'll get first place or not. So I could potentially get first place in 8 out of my 11 fantasy leagues, I believe. So yeah, there's a couple fantasy leagues where I'm just like dead last. There's like no chance for me. But for the most part, I think I did pretty damn good, even though I was giving away all my secrets to you guys. So I hope you all had a lot of fun playing Fantasy LCS. I hope you guys will join me again next split, or if you didn't join my fantasy leagues, you'll consider joining them next split. I don't think I'm going to be able to increase the number, though. 11 is a lot. Maybe I'll take it up to 12 or something, but yeah, I had a lot of fun. I really enjoyed playing with you guys, and you guys definitely made it very challenging. I had to really think long and hard about my picks every single week, so thank you for that. But without further ado, let's get into the Week 9 analysis. I'm going to try and speed it up because this is the last week, and I don't want to go through every single week. So I'm just going to kind of give you a little bit of time to look at some of the previous weeks, and then I'm going to focus on like the last 2 or 3 weeks for both NA and EU LCS. So Week 1, NA, we've gone over this multiple times. We can see that like Jensen was a great pick, Arrow was a great pick, Darshan was a great pick, and then a couple players from Immortals were good that week. Week 2, we're seeing again Jensen, Bjergsen, Darshan. We're seeing these reoccurring names throughout the weeks. Week 3, Jensen, Bjergsen, Darshan. Like these are kind of Stixays in there, Smoothies in there for support. But it seems like Bjergsen, Jensen, Darshan are kind of the main 3 that we're seeing. Week 4, a little bit of a shake-up. Phoenix 1 was definitely the best, and then across the board, then we had TSM, who did well in top lane and jungle. Week 5, yet again, Bjergsen. Mike Young came in Week 5 for Phoenix 1. CLG Darshan and CLG Stixay were very high, and then for FlyQuest, Wild Turtle. And then Week 6, Hanser for TSM, and then Immortals came alive pretty strong in that week. They're A tier and S tier across the board. Alright, Week 7. So this is more recently. Yet again, we're seeing that for TSM and CLG, it's mainly Bjergsen and Jensen that are the 2 really high point scorers. CLG had a pretty good Week 7. Phoenix 1 and FlyQuest are still struggling. CLG, Darshan yet again, but also we're seeing that Huhi and Stixay and Aphromoo also had good weeks in Week 7. Dignitas, even though they went 1-1, they beat TSM that week, not putting up a ton of fantasy points. Immortals, we're seeing that Xmithy was S tier and Pobelter was S tier, and the rest of the team put up some pretty good fantasy points. Echo Fox struggled. Team Liquid actually had a decent week. They went 2-0, and actually Lorlo was S tier, and then Envy kind of struggled quite a bit. Week 8, TSM played phenomenal, and actually the only person who didn't get S tier was Bjergsen and Biofrost. So that was kind of abnormal that Bjergsen wasn't S tier when the rest of his team was. For Cloud9, Jensen top of the pile, S tier, but the rest of the team was near top tier except for Impact and Sneaky. Phoenix won. Ryu came back and played phenomenal. Was S tier there. FlyQuest struggled yet again. CLG was S tier, A tier across the board with Aframu being S tier and the rest of the team being A tier. Dignitas, even though they went 2-0 in Week 8, they did not get that many fantasy points. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on, that even when they go 2-0, they're struggling sometimes if they drop a game. Immortals went 1-1, got upset by Dignitas, and you can see their fantasy points faltered a little bit, but they did score higher than Dignitas, who had a 2-0 week. Echo Fox had a decent week. They were able to upset Phoenix 1. Team Liquid went 0-2, and Envy went 0-2, but they actually had surprisingly good fantasy points for an 0-2 week. So, that is the NA side of things. Let's go over to the EU side of things. So, EU, we're seeing Unicorns of Love, Fnatic, H2K, S tier across the board. G2 had those subs, which is why they didn't perform very well. Week 2, Unicorns of Love, a little bit of Fnatic, Misfits coming online, a little bit of H2K, and then Splice had a really good week, so they shot up to S tier. Week 3, we had Fnatic S tier, we had H2K S tier, and we had Splice S tier. So right now we're looking at Fnatic and H2K are the two most consistent teams, and then Splice is being S tier when they have a favorable week. Week 4, Fnatic S tier, Misfits S tier, Splice S tier, and then H2K had a difficult week against Fnatic. So Misfits is another team like Splice where if they have a good week, they'll be S tier. But we're seeing the G2 throughout all these weeks is struggling quite a bit. Week 5, G2 finally comes online when they have a really favorable week against Monkeys, S tier across the board. Fnatic, S tier most of the way across the board. Misfits lost to H2K. Only person who was S tier is Maxlor. H2K, S tier, and A tier across the board. Splice went down to D tier because they went up against Fnatic. And then Vitality beat Rockhat pretty handedly and was S tier. Week 6, G2, S tier. So now G2's coming online. Fnatic, S tier yet again. Misfits, S tier, even though they lost to Unicorns of Love. And then Unicorns of Love, even though they beat Misfits, did not have very high fantasy points. H2K was all over the map against Rockhat. Splice was D tier again because they went up against G2. Now we're going into week 7. G2 had a interesting week. They went 2-1 in both of their matchups, and you could see that they did not get many fantasy points at all in week 7. Unicorns of Love went 1-1. They're starting to struggle a little bit. We're seeing that they're starting to fall off. They were S tier at the beginning of the split. Now they're not so consistent. Fnatic, though, still S tier. Misfits, S tier, even though they lost to Splice. H2K, S tier, even though they lost to G2. And then Splice, they went 2-0, but they were not S tier, which is what we would expect them to be. They were kind of all over the map with their fantasy points. So we're seeing actually some trends that, like, teams that play Misfits don't get a lot of fantasy points. Teams that play G2 a lot of times don't get a lot of fantasy points. And then Fnatic and H2K look like they're the most consistent teams in the EU side of things. Week 8, G2 had an amazing week. They went against Ninjas and Pajamas. They were S tier across the board with a lot of their people being the number 1 as far as fantasy points. Unicorns of Love was kind of hit or miss in their victory against Monkeys. Fnatic went 2-0 against Misfits, but did not put up good fantasy points. It was actually a really weird series. Misfits got even worse fantasy points. They were pretty much D tier across the board. H2K was able to beat Splice 2-0 and was S tier across the board. Splice is D tier again because they lost 0-2 to H2K. And then we've got Vitality was able to beat Mysterious Monkeys, but they did not have the fantasy points we would have expected. And then Ninjas and Pajamas was able to upset Rockhat and had decent fantasy points, but not amazing fantasy points. So really, like, Fnatic and H2K are probably the most consistent of the teams. Misfits is good when they have a favorable week. G2 is good when they have a favorable week. Unicorns of Love is good when they have a favorable week. And then Splice is just all over the map. They're either, S tier or D tier, it seems like most weeks. And then occasionally, some other of the lower ranked teams will have a favorable week where you can sub them in. But let's get into the week 9, because this is obviously, an extremely important week. So S tier, Immortals. The first team I want to talk about, they have Envy and they have Echo Fox this week. So this is like a dream week 9 for Immortals, because they're in a commanding position. They're tied for first place right now. They've got a very easy week. All they have to do is just not throw, and I'm hoping I'm not jinxing them, but all they have to do is just not throw against Envy and Echo Fox, and, they will have a first round bye. Next up, we've got Fnatic. Fnatic is going up against Rockcat. They should be able to absolutely dominate Rockcat. So I'd expect that Fnatic would be S tier this week. Cloud9 has a really favorable week 9. They're going up against Envy and Echo Fox as well. So this is going to be a very favorable week for them. And then H2K is going up against Vitality. So I think that H2K, if H2K can beat Splice, then they should be able to beat Vitality in a similar fashion. So I would expect H2K to be S tier. TSM, I have them as A tier. They're going up against Phoenix 1 and they're going against CLG. Both Phoenix 1 and CLG I feel like are kind of wild cards. I do give them a better chance against Phoenix 1, and I do think that TSM is the favorite in both of these matches. TSM in week 9 is notoriously difficult to beat. If you look at like TSM's statistics, usually they start off pretty slow going into the split, and then towards the end of the split they start looking unstoppable, and they just they peak right at the right time for playoffs. So I think that it's going to be very hard for any team to beat them in week 9. So I give them a slight edge against both Phoenix 1 and CLG. For my B tier teams, these are kind of like the high risk teams. I've got G2. So G2 is going up against Misfits. So the issue is that Misfits has recently been causing teams to not get that many fantasy points. We saw that with like Fnatic, for example. So that kind of puts G2 at risk. Even though I think the G2 is the favorite to win, if they can't dominate Misfits, then they could struggle, since that's their only matchup this week. Unicorns of Love is going up against Splice, and this is another very volatile matchup, where whichever team wins is most likely going to get pretty high fantasy points, and the team that loses is not. And if they end up going like a 2-1 or a 1-2, then both teams could actually suffer. So that's why they're kind of high risk this week. Misfits going up against G2. So if they're able to upset G2, if they're able to take a game off of G2, then that could be very favorable for them. And then they also have Ninjas in Pajamas. So they are pretty high risk since they're going against G2, but they should be able to beat Ninjas in Pajamas. So that is something they have going for them. Splice is another team that's kind of high risk, high reward, because they're going against Monkeys and they're going against Unicorns of Love. I would expect them to be able to beat Monkeys, but it's really a toss-up with Unicorns of Love. So they're kind of high risk, high reward, most likely going to wind up in that B tier. CLG is another team that has two actually really difficult matchups this week. They're going against Dignitas, who is absolutely on fire recently and is making a really strong move to get into that top 2. It's going to be really hard for them to get there, but if they're able to upset CLG, then they've got a shot. So they've got CLG, or so they got Dignitas they have to go up against, and they've got TSM they have to go up against. So two very hard matchups for week 9 for CLG, especially since they struggled against Phoenix 1 last week. That was definitely kind of a warning bell for me that CLG struggled against Phoenix 1. And then finally, I've got FlyQuest up here in the B tier, and this is because FlyQuest has got Team Liquid, and they've got Phoenix 1. And I do give them the edge against Team Liquid, and then for Phoenix 1, it's really just kind of hit or miss. It just all depends on what Phoenix 1 team shows up for that match, because Phoenix 1 last week, they beat CLG 2-1, and then they lose to Echo Fox 0-2. So it's really hard to tell which Phoenix 1 is going to show up this week for week 9. For my C tier, I've got Dignitas. Even though Dignitas has been playing amazing, and I think they're just an incredibly strong team, they have not been putting up very good fantasy points. Even when they go 2-0, they've been really struggling on the fantasy point front. So I can only put them around C tier right now. And their opponents this week are no pushovers. They've got CLG, which is going to be a rough match. They should be able to beat Team Liquid, who's their second opponent. But that CLG matchup really has me worried for their fantasy points this week. And then my other C tier team is Phoenix One. And the reason why I've got them C tier, they're going against TSM, which is going to be very rough for them. But they are going against FlyQuest, and I think they have a shot at beating FlyQuest. So that could bump them up into, C tier. And I do think that people like Ryu and Arrow could actually be higher than that. Ryu and Arrow could even be as high as S tier or A tier, even if their team doesn't do particularly well. For the D tier, I've got Mysterious Monkeys, who's going against Splice. That's their only matchup this week, so I feel like it's just too high risk, too high reward for them. Vitality is going against H2K, and that's their only match, so I'd avoid them. Team Liquid is going up against FlyQuest and Dignitas this week, so not a horrible week for them, but not a great one either, so I'd avoid them if you can. Envy is going up against Immortals and Cloud9, so that's just an absolutely horrible week for them. Ninjas of Pajamas is going up against Misfits, so another bad week for Ninjas of Pajamas. And then Echo Fox is going up against Immortals and Cloud9, so I would avoid them. And then Rockhat is going up against Fnatic, and that's going to probably be a slaughter, so I definitely would avoid Rockhat. So that's it. That's week 9 in a nutshell. I'm thinking about maybe doing a video on like the probabilities of different teams getting into the playoffs and stuff like that, but I don't know if that's actually going to be useful because on the NA side, I'm pretty sure that the top 6 teams are locked. Like we're sure that the top 6 teams are going to be in the playoffs. I think the 5th and 6th place teams right now are Cloud9 and Envy, and I'm pretty sure they're guaranteed a spot. It's just a question of what the order is going to be, like whether Immortals is going to be 1 or TSM is going to be 1, things like that. So if you guys are interested in that, let me know. On the EU side of things, it seems like the top 2 are definitely going to make playoffs for each group, and then there are possibilities that the number 4 team for each group can overcome the number 3 team. In both groups, they're 2 games behind, but I think it's unlikely. So I think that it's a pretty good chance that we're pretty set as far as what the playoffs are going to look like for the EU side as well. So it's not that interesting of a video in my opinion. But if you guys are interested in that, just let me know, and I'll happily do a video on like who's going to be what seed in the playoffs and things like that. And then I started a new video series for basically highlighting a lot of the educational videos, so like the top 10 educational videos every month, and I'm really proud of that video, and it's kind of my way of saying thank you to the content creators that I really like. So please check out that video and support those content creators who are putting out really good videos. And then I am working on more class videos. I'm hoping to get one of those out in hopefully this week. We'll see. But yeah, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I hope you guys are doing well in your fantasy weeks. If you've got a really important week 9, let me know and give me as much information as you can. I'll try and give you the best advice I can. But if you like this video, always give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. I hope you all have a fantastic day. This is Randomonium, signing off.